Natural selection doesn't have to make any decisions. It doesn't have compassion. It doesn't have interests. It is a slowly, constant, grinding wheel that everything is subjected to. And everything is eventually ground to dust. And the only thing that survives into the future is our genes. Our distant ancestors of, maybe 2.5 million years ago, they developed stone tools, and then maybe later on stone weapons, and then they domesticated fire. That combination of technologies, that supercharged evolution, that provided the fuel for the growing of this expensive cognitive instrument that we call the human brain. What happened at that point in evolution? What happened at that point when that being starts to be aware of its own mortality?
I've read the history of the Amazon. I believe the fellow's name was Francisco de Orellana. He sailed up to Iquitos, and the conquistadors were traveling from the eastern slopes of the Andes down into the jungle and planned to build a boat on the Amazon and sail it all the way across the continent and come out to the ocean. Orellana, took his Spaniards out into the jungle, and a lot of the first contact with natives was with him and his group. I imagine that Spaniards, given their record for colonization, were pretty nonplussed. I imagine that they used them for food and shelter and then moved on. So the path of colonization that wiped out the Incas left all of these tribes in the jungle untouched. Their reality check came later when it came to the rubber boom. That was when Europeans first had an interest in the jungle, was when rubber started having commercial applications with tires, with the invention of the automobile. And all of a sudden the rubber barons showed up and put everybody to work, whether they wanted to or not.
The rebel yell is really one of the most famous things to happen during the Civil War. More people talked about it, wrote about it, letters, diaries, the rebel yell this, the rebel yell that. I've heard a lot of comparisons. Foxhounds, fox calls, a rabbit screaming when caught by a dog, Indian war cries. But one of the curious things is we have all these words and we don't know what it sounded like. How the glasses look.
They look perfect.
Let me read you one poem written by a Yankee. Quote, "The yell was different from all the sounds ever heard, the throat of maddened hounds, of starved hyenas and angry beasts in deadly fight over bloody feasts, or wails of souls in purgatory, lost to heaven and all its glory, ne'er cast o'er man such awful spells of terror as did those rebel yells. Wow, golly.
My brother Judson and my friend Susan Klimkowski and I were riding our horses across America. We've been riding hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles, and we were tired. We were strong at it. Our thighs were strong. Our horses were hardened and muscular. And so we're trotting through this small town. It's misting of rain, and I think we're somewhere on eastern Texas, and just downtown, the mirror shops, glass, we can see people in their offices and all. We're just trotting down about 8 miles an hour. We're working our way across the country, and this guy looks up from his office desk, and then he starts sort of jogging after us. And we get all the way to the edge of town, and he's out in the rain in his clean office clothes, and he's like, "Hey, what are y'all doing?" I was like, "Well, we're riding our horses." He said, "You guys look real." "No, I mean, you really look real." I was like, "Well, we are." It's like, "No, man, you don't understand. You guys look real." Look, now I got a picture here of me in Texas, and that's me on that journey. You see how lean I am? Limited clothing, worn shaps. Those were brand new shaps that I sewed myself to start out on the journey. And in that photograph, the reason I set up that photograph and took it is because there's a fence line in that barren landscape with hundreds of coyotes hung on it with dried blood crusted coming out of their noses that they hung there fresh. Most modern Americans don't have that kind of real experience. They kind of sit on a couch, eat popcorn, and kind of watch somebody that's made up to pretend like they're having that real experience, but aren't. When you sift it down and distill it, is it a natural reality? Is it real or is it not?
I grew up on a farm in Fairview with not a lot of kids around. I had a lot of time to myself. I had a closet full of books, and I think that's where I got the start. It's a window into other people's souls, other people's lives. It's a filter of other people's experiences. When I first picked up poetry anthologies and started reading through, and you go through Whitman and Dickinson, and you start to understand context for the history of the country. I mean, reading someone like Whitman, you learn about the Civil War and you learn about all these issues that were important in their day. You won't meet very many great writers and poets that don't have a foundation in some kind of literature of the past. These guys just, laid this encyclopedia of knowledge before you, and I think that's where I began to really take it seriously. And when I decided to major in literature in college. You can inhabit many different characters, and you can live many lives.
Each one of us, as we're growing up, becomes aware of our own mortality. And I remember that had a profound impact upon me. I thought, this is absurd, this is crazy, this is horrible. Each one of us is going to die. I'm going to die. My parents are going to die. All of my loved ones are going to die. I kept thinking over the years of my early teen life, how can they keep going on with their lives like this, as though this is all going to go on forever? Ultimately, I realized that natural selection anesthetizes us to this awful reality of human mortality.
Growing up in a family in a small town in Virginia, you had history all around you, regardless of whether it was Jamestown or the Civil War. Both my father and grandfather were big history buffs, so I grew up right from the earliest age being imbued with a love of history. As a small kid, my favorite play toys were little Civil War soldiers, and I would array them on the floor of my bedroom and have battles on my floor. I think that the spark goes off when you're very young, if you're a lover of history, and I'm not sure exactly what sets off that spark. With me, it was the little Civil War soldiers.
The first memories that I have of the natural world were my first memories of life and existence, because I was in the forest and in the wild as early as I can remember. My parents were naturalists, and they had me outside before I could crawl. I remember going along creek banks, just looking in every little pocket, nook, and cranny, and seeing what I could find. And I remember looking over into a hollow log and seeing a big snake all coiled up right by my face, you know. I remember catching my first Luna moth. And I remember it was in a blackberry field with broom sage and overgrown and little thorns clinging to me and scratching me, but I didn't care because it was so interesting. And so I was going through there, and all of a sudden, something I'd only heard about, the Luna moth, the big green moth with long tails and big eye spots on it. It was mine.
I think I sort of had a youthful exuberance and vision about music, maybe as providing me with some kind of self-expression and immortality. Transcendence of mundane reality and transcendence of death. This is what most of us are seeking in our lives, and this is what music, I think, fulfills in most of us. It allows us to transcend that confinement of everyday reality. But it also, for those who get famous musically, it allows them to, in some sense, transcend mortality. They become immortal, at least in the minds, of the fans. I eventually got to the point where I realized that that higher level of immortality probably wasn't going to be available to me. I wasn't talented enough at music to achieve that higher level of mortality, or at least that it was going to be a big crapshoot. I went to Harvard Medical School to work with George Church, who's one of the leading genome scientists in the world, and I wanted to learn how to help in this process of re-engineering human cognition to advance human goals rather than the goals of natural selection.
Poetry's sort of been left behind the times. The world moves so quickly now, unless you are tweeting out your haiku or something, we digest so quickly. It's nobody's individual fault. It's the general trend of our technology. I mentioned Ezra Pound a minute ago. It's this great line where Pound says, all things are a-flowing, sage Heraclitus says, and yet a tawdry cheapness shall outlast our days. And a tawdry cheapness is where we are now. In 2 or 3 generations, we will have become accustomed to a sort of medium grade entertainment, which is so low in nutritional value for your mind that you kind of have to graze on it constantly to get any nutrients at all. And poetry, aspires to be nutrient rich, Poetry can be like the nut in the tree that the monkey plucks, and then his children have an evolutionary advantage because they were fed a richer diet, so they have time left over to write sonnets.
Oh, grandfather, grandmother, thank you for this fire, this day. Thank you for these ancient ways, ways of the old people. Good morning, sunshine. Cornmeal we have here. To the rising sun in the east. I didn't just appear like a UFO out of nowhere. I'm a product of the background that produced me. Like my grandfather was very interested in Native beliefs, and I traveled and lived with the Indian tribes and talked to old men and old women and young people, and understood that the Native American culture is not just something that's behind glass in a museum. I had a shirt on a couple days ago. You might have seen one of these Homeland Security, and it's got a couple of Indian figures on there. One of them is Geronimo, and I was showing a few of my campers. I said, "Do you know who this guy is? This is Geronimo." And I said, when I was a child in a play crib before I could stand up and walk, my mom put a big poster of Geronimo beside my play crib. I don't know if she knew what she was doing, but when I was like looking up as a 3 and 4 and 5 month old, guess what I was looking at? I was looking at this guy like this with a Sharps rifle, looking down with this cruel grin of reality on him, And that was the first big image in my life, was Geronimo. Hardcore, to the bone, to the marrow.
I lived in New York and Chicago for 30 years. And I dealt in the world of the emerging global markets, derivatives, collateralized debt obligations, all those things we read about in the newspapers. I was one of the pioneers of that stuff. I was the ultimate globe-hopping transaction person. I find it tremendously invigorating from an intellectual point of view. But I found it increasingly unsatisfactory from an emotional fulfillment point of view. One of the things that I learned for me about the study of history is a sense of duty and honor and service, okay? They're almost foreign words to the Americans of the 21st century. 150 years ago, you fought a duel and you killed the other guy if he had offended your honor. Maybe dueling doesn't need to come back, but some sense of personal honor is a trait that would be terrific.
As a teenager, I was reading the Beat Poets. I was into Kerouac and Ginsberg and these guys. And Allen Ginsberg wrote a book of letters with Burroughs, known as the Yahe letters. And it was essentially their effort to go down to South America and collect this plant medicine, which is made down there in the Amazon. So I had read about Yahe, which is also known as ayahuasca. I have always been interested in the nature of consciousness. I'm interested in the nature of reality, and ayahuasca seemed to be the next frontier. Ayahuasca is actually two plants. One is a vine, the bark of a vine, and the other is a leaf. So you put the leaves into this brew and you cook them down. The active ingredient in ayahuasca is DMT, and it was originally known as telepathine because it was believed that those under the influence of ayahuasca had the ability, to read people's minds, to have telepathic communication. DMT is a molecule that is actually manufactured by the human brain. There's a physician by the name of Rick Strassman. He did the first new clinical trials of psychedelics in 20 years. He thinks that DMT is made by the body to facilitate the passage of the spirit into the body and then out at the moment of death. Almost like adrenaline is released in moments of crisis. It's almost like DMT is released to facilitate the passage of the spirit in and out. And that theory seems sound to me because when you drink ayahuasca, that's exactly what happens. Your spirit is freed temporarily from your body and it's allowed to leave, and it comes back later.
I kind of get the sense that I'm right on the cusp of a lot of change myself individually, from the old ways to the new ways. Culture has always been changing, so don't get me wrong, it's not like stuff started changing all of a sudden. It's always been changing, but we're exponentially changing in speed now due to unprecedented input like television and telephones and computers, things that have never been around before. Take a refrigerator. Seems like a pretty benign thing, right? A refrigerator. Everybody has one or two or three, and a refrigerator has corrupted our social system. And you're going, what? Is this man crazy? A refrigerator keeps food from decomposing. And so you can get it and put it in there and leave it there a long time, and you don't have the social sharing that you would do. When harvest came in, people would share it because it would spoil fast, so they'd say, here, have this neighbor, have this neighbor. It's all interrelated. And then here we can identify refrigerator, freezer, electricity. And it sits right there beside death, not being visible to you. Basically, modern America is completely out of touch with reality, period. Nature is reality. In my definition of what the word reality means, nature defines reality. modern America is having a hard time knowing what even is real. Kids come up to me all the time, is that real? It's like, yeah, it's real. I work with real stuff, you know, I do real things.
We've all seen ourselves on video for the first time and gone, that can't be me. Oh no, that can't be me. How can I go through life anymore, you know, knowing that that's me? We see ourselves in mirrors all the time, but that first time that we see ourselves on video and hear our voices and watch our mannerisms, we're shocked. We've created this narrative about ourselves, and that just falls away. Unfortunately, we can't go beyond that, deeper than that, with technologies like a simple video camera. But we're beginning to, you know, with functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, we're starting to actually get into the functioning of the brain. We're starting to discover those illusions in our narratives, in the dynamic narrative we have deep in our minds.
People are interesting the way they assemble their own memory bank. There is clearly a lack of consistency to being human, and it's not even a duality. I think of it like, you know, when you look at that dandelion when the bloom's gone away and it's just come out in all those seeds. That's what each one of us are like. There are all sorts of facets to each one of us. The search for truth is an elusive search because one person's truth is another person's myth. One of the great things that modern historians are dealing with is the difference between what they call history and what they call memory. Okay, let me give you an example. Nat Turner's insurrection, a slave revolt in 1831 that happened very close to where I grew up. Nat Turner got a band of slaves. They revolted. They killed a bunch of white people. Okay, now, let's talk history. Was Nat Turner an inspired freedom fighter, or was Nat Turner a murdering terrorist? Yeah, he was both. It depends on who you ask and what they think and what their background is. Nat Turner can be both in history, but he can only be one in memory. Who knows, 100 years from now, Osama bin Laden, is he a terrorist? In my mind, he's clearly a terrorist. Well, to some people, he's an inspired freedom fighter. Okay, now, how will history record him 50, 150, 250 years from now? I don't know, but I know that there's a diversity of memory that's building up today.
My grandfather realized that in the trenches in World War I, he sort of started taking notes and realized, hey, these guys don't have as much common sense as they should. They don't know how to take their hat and dip it in water to feed their mule. He was catching on to the fact that there was a void that needed to be taken care of even then, like in 1920. One of the reasons that I moved out into the natural world at age 17 and just like left the indoors altogether was because nature has a pattern of following certain predictable laws, natural laws, gravity, inertia, thermodynamics, and you can count on them. Whereas a lot of man-made, contrived things or human social situations rise and fall and change, and you don't know what's going to happen or if your friend's going to abandon you from day to day. I know that the mountain lion will kill the deer. I know that the copperhead will bite if it's enticed to.
Most people who drink ayahuasca see snakes at some point. They'll see jaguars, or they'll see birds, or they'll see vines, and images from the jungle. But snakes are by far the most common. So you have to ask yourself, people all over the world that have never even been to the jungle drink this brew and they see images from the jungle, then part of the consciousness in the brew must be coming from the plant in order for you to see those visions without a cultural context. I mean, you sort of would have to conclude that, right? To me, it strongly suggests that there is a plant consciousness at work. These images derive from the plant itself, which derives from the jungle. If you do believe that you're in touch with a higher consciousness when you drink this plant medicine, from where does that consciousness derive? Is it in the plant? Some people believe it is the spirit of Gaia, of Earth Mother herself. Or does the plant medicine merely act as a channel for something grander and more universal? Maybe it's the voice of God or one of his emissaries. And ayahuasca is simply the medium preparing our brains to perceive something larger than what we would normally.
This is the Front Street Inn in Wilmington, North Carolina. I'm in room 4, the Segovia Suite. I'm here to do a documentary film, be interviewed by the filmmaker Edward Tyndall. They're going to pick me up tonight at 7 o'clock for dinner. It's now it's 4:28. So I guess I'm just going to make myself at home. There are two different options for a technological solution to human mortality. One is the conquest of aging. I think that's extremely unlikely. It's certainly not going to happen anytime soon. But then the other alternative is that we preserve essential aspects of our identities, of our personalities, of information that resides in our brains that makes us who we are. Maybe transfer it to a different kind of a substrate that isn't a biological brain. So when we think about the conquest of mortality by the movement of information, or the copying of information of a a given identity or a given consciousness, there's a wide range of latitude, I think, that will satisfy our needs. There has to be some greater level of integrated personality that gets preserved for there to be a sense of continuity, of identity. But it doesn't have to be perfect. And it isn't perfect now. When we go to sleep at night, for example, we wake up in the morning a slightly different person. Our brains have changed. Our memories have consolidated. Our ideas have been slightly altered in the process of sleep. And when we wake up the next morning, we feel like we're the same person, but we're not quite the same person.
The Appalachian Trail for me was an amazing journey. That's what it was. It was setting out one day, and I walked for 4.5 months, and I met my goal. I started on Mount Katahdin. It's a big, tall, majestic mountain up north, and I walked every day until I got to the top of Springer Mountain. And so I got a lot closer to nature on that journey than most people ever do. I was very hungry. I was like crazily hungry. I wanted food all the time. I would find a rattlesnake and eat the rattlesnake, kill it with a rock, and I would catch a few trout in the stream, and I would smash a porcupine on the head with a stick and eat that. I stripped down to where I wasn't wearing hardly any clothes. I was wearing 2 bandanas. So that was what I had in the world. That journey, that challenge, that passing right, it helped me clarify what was important, what I wanted to do with my life, time to reflect and say, well, you know, I've got a life. This is my life. Life is short. I'll be dead in so many years. What am I going to do with my life? Basically, I've seen, ever since I was a child, I listened to the old timers. Yeah, my family farm got sold, and yeah, we used to see where that mall is. Yeah, we used to have fields down here. I heard that over and over. I was listening every day. There was no old timer that didn't tell me some version of that story. So I knew within my lifetime, even though there were still some pockets of wild land around, they would be gone if somebody didn't do something about it. So I needed to be one of the people who volunteered to throw my life down to make a piece of wild preserve and then actively do something with it.
Just recently in America, we passed a tipping point where more than half of the American population lives in major cities. At the time of the Civil War, that was not close to being the case. When soldiers enlisted, they wrote down what their occupation was. 85% of Confederate soldiers said that they were farmers. It is interesting as this nation has moved, particularly in the post-World War II era, from rural small towns to big cities. The great tradition of family oral histories is getting harder and harder. Families don't live together, they don't stay together. There are plenty of grandkids who don't know their grandparents well because they visit every other Christmas for 2 days or something like that. Most museums get most of their visitors from the immediate area. We do not. About 70% of our visitors come from out of state. Our number 2 state for visitors is Californians. Okay, now, why is that? And I ask a lot of Californians that come to the museum, why from California to Richmond, Virginia to the Museum of the Confederacy? And what you find is people are in search of their roots. They need some sort of an identity with the past. Sometimes people have enormously emotional responses.
A meaningful consciousness cannot exist in a slice of time. We have these ideas, we have these beliefs, we have these experiences. They are memories inside of our heads that allow us to shape our beliefs about ourselves. We have this narrative about what our lives represent. An indispensable part of taking that narrative on a particular direction into the future is what happened in the past. Each individual memory that resides in a person's brain, it's a representation. It's not a perfect recreation of what actually happened in the past, of an experience that actually happened. It's not exactly a representation of what happened in the way that a video recording is.
Either you believe that the mind runs on a closed circuit and anything you come up with is generated from inside, or you believe that it's a two-way radio and you can send and receive and you can get information. And I firmly believe that the mind runs on an open circuit all the time, but we really only perceive it in ayahuasca because it frees your spirit to go out and mix into this world for a little while. The question essentially is, what is the relationship between this physical world and the spirit world? Are they interfused? Do they connect physically or in the mind? Science can't prove that God exists, and religion, has its own problems with science. And yet, both are legitimate ways of getting at this problem of, when you have an experience where you feel like you're in the presence of the divine, is it provable in any way beyond your own mind? You are left to your own devices to decide whether what you're perceiving is divine and emanating from the divine, or whether it's just a fancy illusion that's being conjured up in your brain. And that's fine. Maybe it's the realm of poets and philosophers instead.
Gentlemen of the Corps, I, like all of you, do my very best to portray the Confederate soldier in every aspect of his life, from the proper weapons, uniform, tactics, and accoutrements. But there's one thing throughout the years that we have been doing incorrect, and that is the rebel yell. And so that is why I'm here today, so to teach you the proper rebel yell. It is in a cadence of 3.
I was at a meeting of the Civil War Preservation Trust, and I ran into a reenactor who said, gee, Wade, have you ever heard the real recording of a Confederate veteran giving the rebel yell? And I said, no. And he said, oh, we've got it on our website. I got back from the meeting, got on my computer, got on their website and listened to it. When I first heard it, I didn't know what to think of it. It was so dissimilar to what I thought I was going to hear. So I started researching. When was this recording made? On the tape, it identified WBT radio in Charlotte. Okay, so I went to the people at WBT Radio. You can imagine radio stations don't keep great archival records, so they had limited information, but I did find out who the man was. He was a private in the 37th North Carolina named Thomas Alexander. And he went into the studio in the 1930s and they recorded him. Okay, now let's do a little bit of math. Let's say he was 20 when he enlisted. Well, 1930s, we're talking about 60 years later. The guy is 80 years old when he's doing it. Maybe his memory had gone bad. Maybe he had been influenced by something he had heard in the 60 years since the war.
It's interesting to contemplate what all of these recordings of people represent and what they will allow in the future. There is a community of people that do what's called life logging or cyber logging or glogging. There are various names. And the idea is that you record a lot of your experiences. For example, if I turn this on and I record all these experiences that I'm having, so I'm recording this right now. If I record bits and pieces of my life, of all the mundane and fabulous and exciting and trivial things that happen to me throughout my life, theoretically you could reconstruct at least some of what's going on in my brain. Imagine I have a database of years of tens of thousands of my everyday moments recorded with both audio and video. And we have a really good, powerful computer that can search through that database, and the computer can draw on those experiences in the same way, or a very similar way, to the way that the brain draws on remembered experiences. For example, if you ask it a question about an event from, say, a couple years ago, you say, do you remember that time that we did X, where we went to the park and we had that conversation, and we ate lunch, while we were watching the ducks on the pond? If you have a really good computer and good search algorithm for speech recognition, it could not only look at different keywords like ducks and pond and lunch and conversation, but looking at all your past experiences that involved those different keywords, the computer can construct a contextual database that is very similar to the kind of interconnected meaning that is carried within our memories in our brains. We're beginning then to construct a consciousness. We're beginning to construct a mind that functions in a lot of ways like the brain does.
We have an internship, a one-year internship. I tell people this is a hard program. This is not for everybody. In the old days, it would be a vacation. But for today's youth, it's very hard. It's very challenging. I had she was a graduate of college, getting ready for an Ivy League school up in the Northeast, going for her master's. She came, she wanted to help out because she had heard about Turtle Island. She was excited about being able to help do this and had greatest intentions. She said, what can I do? I said, just roll those barrels up there and put them in the pile. So I go start doing my thing, and I turn and I look, and she's rolling the barrels up the mountainside end over end, not making use of the fact that they're round. Like, her culture has been using a wheel for hundreds of years. And she sees one on her car, in everybody's car. But she doesn't know how to make a round thing roll. I've been in Guatemala where a 4-year-old completely understands how to use a machete as long as her body that understands physics, leverage, how to whack, hit it like that, understands what angle to cut into the wood so that it separates the fibers, like understanding the integrity and the fiber content of a piece of wood, understands which piece of wood to get to cut with and splinter with their machete to make the candles that they use beside their fire. But here in our culture, a successful college student can't roll something that's round. But what's the difference in those two pictures?
I mean, is it possible that we're becoming some weird other thing, some new version of people?
Maybe a new version, but I'd hate to call it people.
I heard through the grapevine somehow that the UDC, the United Daughters of the Confederacy, had a recording of a Confederate veteran giving the rebel yell. Lots of conversations with the ladies at the UDC, and they said, yes, we do have a recording. Nobody's listened to it for decades. It's on a wax disc. We're afraid to play it for fear that it might destroy the wax disc. I finally convinced the ladies to let me take that disc to a modern sound studio and capture the sound on it. I'll never forget the day they delivered a CD, and I went in my office and put the CD on a boombox and almost covered my eyes. I hit the play button. You can hear this crackling voice, and it was a guy not from a North Carolina infantry group, but a Virginia cavalry regiment, 8th Virginia, a guy named Simmons. Well, let me tell you, Simmons sounded exactly like our North Carolina friend. The smile that crossed my face must have broken every blood vessel or stretched every muscle, because finally I said, I think we've got it. I think we've got two men, different groups, different times, different purposes, giving the same yell. This must be it. Okay, how do I convert 2 voices to 1,000 voices? Let's play these tapes over and over themselves, and every time, every iteration, let's change the bass and the treble and the speed so that you give multiple voices to these 2 men. That came back, and I hit the play button in this horrible shrieking, screaming, blood-curdling. Every word that I had read had meaning when I listened to this sound.
It's been suggested that Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead is the most recorded musician in history. Reportedly in excess of 10,000 hours, maybe 15,000 hours of recordings of him playing music. If you have a system, even no matter how complex, that behaves within certain parameters and that has various feedback loops that it engages in, and each one of us has those kinds of explorations that we do when we engage in conversation or we send out an email. We're exploring, but we're doing it within the defined boundaries of our minds, the defined boundaries of our experience. If we have enough of those samplings throughout the life of the mind, you know, we have the data to recreate the essential function of it. And so Jerry Garcia's, guitar playing in various different contexts, those were his musical explorations. If we wanted to, we could recreate the musical mind, in some sense, that produced that music. We can recreate the brain, or that construct, the mind, that created those explorations.
This place wears a lot of hats, but if you tried to distill it down into a very short story, it's to help people to enrich their life, to make their life more sustainable and meaningful, using the natural world as a format. So we often use simple activities like butchering a rooster, or tanning a deer skin, or rubbing sticks together to make a fire as vehicles for a greater change within the person. Things that are transferable to different cultures and different time periods. We teach you how to kill and butcher a rooster, and you actually get to the point where you can recognize that it is your life, and that its death is a ticket, like a passage for you to continue living for a few more days. That's a closer connection that becomes fertile ground for spiritual awareness, and modern America doesn't have that fertile ground. They haven't had blood splatter all over them or heard the crunching of bones and the squealing of death. They haven't touched the natural world in that way. When you put your hands on it, then you can see yourself in the context of it, and you can have the light turned on and the scales fall from your eyes and the blinders torn off, and all of a sudden you can see where you fit into the world. And what more meaningful thing for a person to become aware of their existence, find meaning in life.
So a good friend of mine had a chance to go and drink with a real Peruvian shaman. So I went along down to Peru, to the Amazon. The city is called Iquitos, and it's in the upper Amazon, in deep, unspoiled rainforest. And it's actually known as a city where there are a lot of shamans. There's a lot of ayahuasca activity going on, and it's a fascinating place. So there I was in the jungle in Peru, about 7 kilometers outside of Iquitos. We met the shaman and we drank this disgusting brew that looked like motor oil. I started to get physically agitated, and I began to see some trails and some tracers and things. And then fairly quickly I started to get nauseous, and the level of intensity in my mind started to really get ratcheted up. And I got up and purged, and the purge is what opened up this window in my mind. There's this enormous, chaos happening, chaos of visions, and it wasn't pleasant. It was like being in the stormy seas in the dead of night, where I thought I was going to capsize. And it got so bad that I started to get scared, and I decided to open my eyes and get out of it. And when I opened my eyes, I was still there. Nothing changed. And I was waving my hand in front of my face and could not see it. And that's when I realized that I was all the way out. I was all the way out of my body. I found myself in the presence of a being that was a being of such awesome power that merely being in its presence was almost too much to handle. And it was like I was too close to the sun and I was being scorched by its power.
Cielo ya was karandanding, cielo ya was karandanding. here is one Confederate veteran's rebel yell.
Gary Gallagher at the University of Virginia says it's one of the great discoveries of the 21st century, and he's playing it to his students. The sound transcends the words. The sound communicates as well to students in the 21st century as it did to soldiers in the 19th century. I would love to hear or see a videotape of Abraham Lincoln giving the Gettysburg Address. It has to have been better than the fabulous words that you read on a sheet of paper. What did Abraham Lincoln sound like? What I would give to hear Robert E. Lee's voice.
I think the resurrection of deceased humans is definitely already happening. They're not real resurrections, they're not real interactive personalities, but they are getting more and more real. And it depends on how much archival data we have on the things that they did and said and thought and wrote. You know, in building up to systems for the reanimation of a human mind, it's going to take a very, very long time for us to understand how brains work. It's going to take a long time for us to understand what kind of data we need. But we're in the data collection and storage phase right now. And the best sort of default position to take is to collect as much information as you can on people and situations that you think are valuable, that define the lives that you would like to have reconstructed or reanimated.
This is the age of communication, is that not right? People are the worst communicators now than they ever have been. The reality of it is, the truth is that we're about to fall apart. And if I didn't think that, I'd have more hope, and I'd be working harder, but I think we're just about to collapse. Other people in other countries will do much better. People that don't have much high technology to begin with, that are closer to their food source and can fix something when it breaks, they won't be hurt that much. It's the higher technology, the modern Americans that are so far from the source of things. Like, when you break it right down, we live by food and water, shelter and clothing, some elemental things. How much do any of us know about any of those things?
When you come down from the mountain, the sun comes up the next morning and you still have to make breakfast and, feed the cows and go on about your day. How can you just get up and go to work? Why don't you just go wander naked, with your staff, like Caine in Kung Fu, and just go wander through the world? Well, it's not like that. I still have to pay my mortgage. I am much comforted to know that God exists and there's a spirit world. That gives me great comfort.
Every job has good days and bad days. On your worst day as an investment banker, I guess you go stare at a little piece of lucite on your desk that records some deal you did, and you're supposed to feel good about yourself. On my worst day here, and you have bad days, I come out into the museum and I see Mom and Dad and 2 kids staring at Robert E. Lee's uniform, and almost a glow in their face that this is something that means something to them. And I walk back to my office feeling fulfilled. I never did that before. I want history to record that maybe I made a difference to somebody. And I'm not sure an investment banking transaction could qualify as making a difference to anybody.
I've gotten more mature in a lot of ways, and I've gotten tired. And I've helped a lot of people, and I've done a lot of good, but haven't really reached the goal that I was after, which was a bigger goal of creating some kind of cultural revolution. I imagine people moving out on the land. I was trying to look at the big picture of helping the whole culture and the world, but I feel like I failed. All I can really do is do what I think I should do, and I'm doing that. I'm running an education center, and each individual that comes through here, all they really control is themselves, and all the world is made up out of individuals. I would hope that each individual would take responsibility for themselves. If every individual did better, the whole would be better. That's just a mathematical equation. It's that simple. Say a 25-year-old person that wants all the answers, like they felt and tasted the dissatisfaction of something in the world. Maybe they're like I was at 17, they know something's not quite right. So they're like, show me how to do everything, Eustace. I'm like, well, we'll start today and I'll show you how to hoe the corn first. We'll work with one thing at a time.
I still plan to go back to Iquitos for the rest of my life, and to go back to the jungle. I plan to continue working with ayahuasca. When I was in my 20s, I was agnostic. Now I believe in God. And I pray. I move through a world that I know contains more than is visible to the eye and is more than I can perceive. And that's a profound difference from the way I looked at the world when I was younger. I imagine when I finally croak that I'll go forward through that tunnel of light and move into a state in which you're in a single moment with no reflection on the past or the future that lasts forever.
I just read this week of a company that spun out of Microsoft Research that's going to start marketing a camera for wearing around your neck for doing chronic recording of experiences. We already have audiovisual cameras everywhere. They're pervasive. We have them in our pockets. They're in buildings we go in. They're in our houses. We have webcams. But we haven't seen anything yet. There are going to be sensors everywhere collecting information constantly. Technology. We are indistinguishable from our technologies. We're interdependent. We're intertwined. There is no clear division anymore. I think the future will be a reconnection of a previously widely divergent strategy that was undertaken by nature. In other words, human beings have grown outward in a huge family tree. We're all related to one another in this radiating family tree with each branch going out, with each of us representing the tip of that branch. And it's grown outward over the entire history of humanity and pre-humanity. But we're starting to reconverge into a network of communication, a network of shared identity through the sharing of information in the internet. And we're going to reconnect that tree that radiated outward with all those branches and all those distinct points. Most or all of them will just reconverge into one huge identity.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jerry Garcia.
Kate is the name that I served on the devil tree. To someone's Catholic and tore up the tracks again. In the winter of '65, we was